Well, you can imagine how I feel about that, but you can also imagine, not even imagine, that is the most illogical argument in the history of arguments.
The silence of the palace broke when King Charles revealed that Archie's parents were not who the public believed. The declaration rippled through the hall, leaving the royal family stunned. Harry's fury was immediate, his voice trembling as he demanded an end to the accusations. Meghan, however, remained composed, her quietness only deepening the uncertainty. But was this revelation the unveiling of a truth hidden for years, or a statement designed to fracture a family? And if the crown held such a secret, what else might still be concealed? The shocking revelation. The evening had been planned as a quiet royal gathering, but there was nothing quiet about the air inside the palace. Chandeliers glowed softly above, yet the tension in the room was sharp enough to cut through every whispered word. Courtiers stood close to the walls, exchanging uneasy glances as if they already sensed that something unusual was about to unfold. King Charles sat at the head of the long, polished table. Charles's expression was grave, enough to unsettle even the most assured attendants. He cleared his throat, and the sound carried through the hall. Conversation stopped, and attention turned to him, anticipating a formal toast or words of reassurance. Instead, he began to speak slowly, introducing a revelation that would break the fragile calm. He stated that Archie was not who the public believed him to be. Murmurs and gasps spread across the gathering as he continued, claiming that Archie's parents were not Harry and Meghan, and that they had died shortly after his birth. The room fell into stunned silence, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. Harry's face turned pale, his lips parting in disbelief. Harry's breathing quickened, his expression marked by shock. His voice wavered between anger and confusion as he demanded clarity. Around him, those present remained still, no one daring to move. The courtiers stiffened, afraid even to blink. Meghan sat in silence, her eyes fixed on the table as if she wished to vanish into it. Her stillness only deepened the sense of unease. For a moment, she looked like a statue carved from stone, calm on the outside but hiding storms within. The room itself seemed to hold its breath. Whispers began at the edges, spreading like fire through dry leaves. The claim was too shocking, too dangerous and too cruel to ignore. Every person present knew that once these words escaped the palace walls, they would set the world ablaze. Harry's fists clenched at his sides, his jaw tightening. The son, who had already distanced himself from the crown, now stood on the brink of breaking altogether. He looked around the table, desperate for someone to deny what had just been said, but no one spoke. The silence was louder than any answer could have been. Why would King Charles choose this moment to reveal something so devastating? And what did he gain by exposing such a truth? Harry's outrage. Harry could not hold back the storm rising within him. The moment the words left his father's mouth, he pushed his chair back so sharply that it screeched against the polished floor. His face was red, his eyes burning. Harry's voice cut sharply through the silence, rising in anger. The atmosphere in the room grew tense as he stepped toward Charles, his hand unsteady as he pointed. His words accused his father of bringing humiliation upon himself, Meghan, and Archie before others, demanding recognition of the damage done. Charles did not respond. He sat still, his expression unreadable. The quietness of his father only deepened Harry's fury. To him, this was not just an attack on Archie. It was a betrayal of the bond between father and son. Meghan stood and reached toward Harry, her gesture quiet and restrained. She spoke softly, urging him to stop. Harry, however, pulled back, unable to contain the depth of his hurt. The words he had heard weighed heavily, leaving him unable to settle his emotions. The courtiers shifted uncomfortably. Those nearby were uncertain whether to step in or remain silent. Some averted their eyes, others busied themselves, yet the tension in the room was unavoidable. Rumors had lingered in the palace for years, but never had they surfaced so openly. Harry's voice wavered as he spoke again, quieter now, his words carrying anguish. He accused his father of destroying not only their relationship but also his own sense of himself as a father. The air was thick with unspoken fear. It was clear that nothing said tonight could ever be undone. Harry turned sharply, his footsteps heavy as he stormed out of the hall. Meghan hesitated, her eyes darting between her husband and the silent king before following quickly behind. The door closed with a loud thud, leaving the room in stunned silence. Staff exchanged nervous looks, realizing they had witnessed the kind of fracture that could not easily be mended. In that moment, the monarchy itself felt shaken, not by outside critics, but by its own blood. Could Harry's anger turn into a permanent break with the monarchy? Or was this exactly what Charles wanted? Meghan's silence. When the room erupted in gasps and Harry's fury filled the air, Meghan remained seated, her hands folded neatly in her lap. To those watching, she appeared calm. Too calm. Her shoulders were straight, her face still, and her lips pressed tightly together. Yet her eyes betrayed something deeper. Behind that polished composure, there was unease, a flicker of fear, as though she was holding back words she dared not speak. Not a single sound escaped her mouth. She neither defended her husband nor questioned the king. The silence, more piercing than any cry, sent ripples through the hall. People began to wonder, why was she so quiet? Why did she not speak, not even to comfort Harry when his voice trembled in rage? Speculation grew like a storm cloud. Did she already know what King Charles had revealed? Had she carried this burden all along, protecting her son with silence? Or was she as blindsided as Harry, forced to mask her shock behind an unshakable mask? Her quietness became its own kind of noise. Courtiers whispered that Meghan's silence was not innocence, but knowledge. Journalists outside the palace later picked up the same thought. Why would a mother stay so calm if her child's very identity had been thrown into question? Her silence turned her into a mystery, one that no one could easily solve. Each photograph of her that night, her lowered eyes, her tight smile, became symbols of a secret the world desperately wanted to understand. Some called it dignity. Others called it guilt. Still, Meghan gave no explanation. She walked beside Harry when he stormed out, her steps steady, her hand brushing against his, but no words fell from her lips. To those watching, it was as though she carried a truth heavier than anyone else in the room. Was Meghan hiding a secret too heavy to confess? Or was she simply blindsided like everyone else? The palace whispers. Behind the tall walls of the palace, silence rarely lasts. After the king's revelation, whispers began to move quickly, spreading from corridor to corridor. Courtiers gathered in small clusters, their voices low, their eyes darting to ensure no one else was listening. Every word spoken carried weight, and every silence carried suspicion. Some insisted that the king had chosen his words with intent, that this was not a slip but a warning. Some viewed the statement as a slip, a confession spoken under pressure. Regardless of interpretation, discussions often circled back to Archie. Soon, details began to surface in the media. Certain journalists received late-night calls with sources cautiously offering fragments of information. One hint suggested there was more to Archie than the public realized, and once printed, the words quickly spread. By morning, newspapers were filled with headlines too explosive to ignore. Talk shows and tabloids magnified the gossip until it was louder than any truth the palace might one day offer. Each version was different, some painting the king as ruthless, others accusing Meghan of deceit. The conflicting stories only deepened the mystery. Was this chaos carefully designed, or had Charles truly spoken without thought? No one could tell. Even inside the palace, staff were divided. Some swore the king had been planning this for months. Others whispered that he had only spoken out of frustration. The gossip became unstoppable, circling the palace like an endless echo. And still, the truth remained hidden, buried beneath layers of rumor and fear. If the palace knew more than they let on, who else was involved in keeping the truth hidden all these years? The media storm. The news did not crawl. It raced. By dawn, what had been whispered inside palace walls had spilled into every corner of the globe. Newspapers carried it boldly across their front pages. Television anchors spoke of little else. Even those who had never followed the royal family suddenly had an opinion, repeating words they had read, adding fuel to a fire already out of control. Discussions grew intense as talk shows debated the king's words. Some questioned whether they reflected cruelty, while others argued they were truths the public had a right to hear. Across networks, the framing differed, but the central questions remained. Had Harry been betrayed? Had Meghan misled the public? And what would the implications be for Archie? Social media turned the story into a battlefield without rules. Supporters of Harry posted pictures of him holding Archie, praising him as a father. Others scoured old interviews of Meghan, pulling apart her words as though each sentence carried a hidden clue. Hashtags trended, memes appeared, and strangers argued endlessly with strangers, each convinced they held the truth. What hurt the most was that Archie, still too small to read a headline, had become the center of it all. His name was repeated in arguments and jokes, as if he were no longer a child, but a puzzle to be solved. The innocence of a boy was swallowed by the curiosity of millions. The palace remained silent, which only made things worse. Every hour without a statement gave the media more room to invent their own versions. Some painted Charles as ruthless, a king willing to wound his son for the sake of the crown. Others painted Meghan as a woman hiding behind silence, carefully guarding secrets. And then there were those who saw Harry as a man betrayed by the very blood meant to protect him. The truth, however, stayed hidden beneath the noise. The louder the world argued, the less anyone seemed to understand. But could the truth the media is chasing be more complicated than anyone dares to admit? Family divided. While the outside world shouted in headlines and debates, the inside of the palace grew heavy with silence. The royal family, once united under duty, now seemed split by doubt and distrust. The revelation had left scars that no one dared speak of, but everyone could feel. William carried the weight in his eyes. He showed concern for his younger brother, but he kept his words measured, always guarded. He was torn. He wanted to reach for Harry, but the distance between them had grown wide. Their childhood closeness felt like a memory, and now William stood on one side of the divide, Harry on the other. Some insiders whispered that William feared being pulled into the storm if he got too close. Others said he simply could not forgive Harry's choices of the past. Whatever the truth, his silence spoke louder than anything he could say. Kate, graceful as ever, remained even quieter. She played her role in public with perfect poise, offering smiles that gave nothing away. Yet behind those smiles, speculation brewed. Did she secretly urge William to mend the bond, or was she silently protecting him from more pain? Her calmness was admired, but also questioned. Her silence became a mirror where people saw whatever story they wished. Then there was Camilla, a figure who carried whispers like a shadow. Some courtiers swore she had encouraged Charles, telling him that truth, however harsh, was better than whispers that refused to fade. Others dismissed it as rumor, claiming Charles had acted on his own. But the suspicion clung to her, and no denial could shake it off. Every time her name was mentioned, the story gained another twist. The monarchy itself felt cracked. Behind the polished doors, conversations grew shorter, glances sharper. Trust was no longer taken for granted. Could this revelation be the final blow to an already fragile royal family? The search for truth. After his father's revelation, Harry found no rest. The words lingered, returning each time he closed his eyes. Seeking clarity, he confronted Charles directly. His voice was unsteady but insistent as he asked for the full truth, speaking as a father intent on protecting his child. Charles did not yield. Though his expression softened, his response was firm. It was not the time. The exchange left Harry with fragments rather than answers. The silence that followed carried more weight than words, leaving him unsettled. His frustration was visible. His hands clenched, his voice low, as he pressed again for honesty. But no further explanation came. Unable to trust the answers withheld from him, Harry turned to his own path. He began reaching out to people he trusted, calling old friends, and quietly asking questions that no father should ever have to ask. He dug through papers, traced documents, and searched for anything that might confirm or deny the words that had shattered his peace. Every page he read only led to more confusion. Some doors opened, others slammed shut. Rumors felt heavier than facts, and secrets seemed to multiply instead of vanish. Meghan watched him quietly from the side, her eyes filled with worry, but she knew Harry's search was something he had to walk through on his own. The journey gave him no comfort, only more shadows. And with every step, he wondered if the truth he was chasing was worth the pain it would bring. So, how did all these affect Meghan? Did she know about this all along? Meghan under fire. As Harry searched in silence, the world turned its gaze toward Meghan. Public suspicion grew sharper and louder with every passing day. Questions about her past were dragged back into the light. Old controversies she had once put behind her were brought forward again, dressed as proof that she had always been hiding something. Newspapers filled their pages with half-truths and exaggerated headlines. Commentators replayed her interviews, picking apart every smile, every pause, every word. Some asked if she had always known the truth about Archie. Others claimed she had carefully built a wall of silence to protect herself. The attacks grew relentless, like waves crashing against the same shore. Meghan walked through it all with her head held high, refusing to defend herself, refusing to offer the world a single word. Her silence became her shield. Yet that same silence only made her look more guilty to those who had already decided to believe the worst. Behind closed doors, Meghan's calm was tested. She felt cornered, her every move under the sharpest of lights. But she chose stillness over defense, dignity over noise. Harry, however, could not remain silent. He rose again and again to protect her. In interviews, in private arguments with family, even in heated calls, he stood for her without hesitation. His love was fierce, but it only widened the gulf between him and Charles. Each word of defense felt like another line drawn in the sand, separating father and son even further. The world debated Meghan's silence endlessly. Was she hiding a truth too dangerous to reveal, or was she simply refusing to be broken by the voices against her? Could Meghan's silence actually be protecting Harry from a truth too explosive to handle? Archie. At the center. Archie was just a child, too young to understand the storm surrounding him, too innocent to know that whispers of doubt had touched his name. While the world debated and judged, he played with his toys, laughed at small joys, and reached for his parents with trusting hands. Yet Harry felt the weight pressing down on his son's shoulders, a burden no child should ever carry. Late at night, Harry often stood by Archie's crib, watching his son breathe peacefully. The soft rise and fall of Archie's chest reminded him that this tiny boy was not a rumor, not a headline, but his flesh and blood. Tears occasionally welled in Harry's eyes as he spoke softly into the silence, vowing protection. Within the quiet of their home, private moments of tenderness offered him strength. He often held Archie close, his embrace conveying a desire to shield his son from the pressures and scrutiny of the outside world. Meghan would sometimes find them sitting together, Harry rocking gently with Archie in his lap, his eyes fixed on the boy with fierce devotion. But outside those walls, the storm grew louder. Every paper carried Archie's name, every commentator speculated. For Harry, it was unbearable to watch strangers drag his son into battles he never chose. The pain of it burned deep, because all Harry wanted was to give his child a life free of the shadows that had haunted his own. Public sympathy grew as people saw the father's struggle. Many hearts softened at the sight of Harry holding Archie with such tenderness, his face etched with sorrow yet filled with determination. Images of father and son spread across the world, and for a moment, people remembered that behind the headlines was a family clinging to love. Still, doubt did not vanish. Whispers lingered, carried on by those who fed on suspicion. Harry often felt the scrutiny of public attention, the questions and speculation surrounding him. Yet he worked to keep those doubts away from Archie. One evening, while his son slept peacefully, Harry leaned close and spoke softly, affirming his bond and promising protection. His words were quiet but resolute, carrying the weight of a father's vow. The world may have been restless, but Harry's resolve was clear. He would protect his son at any cost, even if it meant carrying the pain alone. Will Archie grow up haunted by a secret he never asked for, or will Harry shield him from the shadow of doubt? Royal Legacy. In Question. While Harry wrestled with his private battle, a different storm brewed within Britain and beyond. Historians, scholars, and royal watchers weighed in with heavy voices. What did this uncertainty mean for the line of succession? Could tradition endure when trust had been fractured? Questions that once belonged to whispers now echoed across newsrooms, classrooms, and drawing rooms alike. For centuries, the crown had stood as a symbol of continuity. Bloodlines were traced with precision, legitimacy guarded like a sacred flame. Yet, with the doubt surrounding Archie, cracks appeared in the story the monarchy had always told. Was the future as secure as it seemed, or had the chain been weakened in ways unseen? Charles, at the heart of it all, faced his own storm. His decision to reveal fragments of truth left many unsettled. Critics accused him of jeopardizing the monarchy's stability, of allowing suspicion to grow where certainty should have stood firm. For a king meant to embody steadiness, his silence and hesitation seemed to many like weakness. Across Britain, debates filled the air. Some defended the crown, insisting tradition could withstand rumor. Others argued that the monarchy had entered dangerous waters, its very legitimacy now questioned in ways that could not be easily undone. The doubt was not confined to the kingdom. Newspapers in other countries carried the story, and conversations in distant lands mirrored those in Britain. The monarchy's reputation, already tested by past controversies, now suffered another harsh blow. Trust, once carefully held, seemed to slip through the cracks. In pubs, in homes, and even in Parliament halls, people asked the same haunting question. If the future heir carried doubt, what did that mean for the monarchy itself? Charles carried the weight in silence, his shoulders bent with the strain of both fatherhood and kingship. He knew every decision he made would be judged, not just by his family but by a nation looking for certainty. Yet the more he withheld, the heavier the judgment became. For the royal institution, the moment felt like a turning point. Would tradition endure, or would suspicion weaken its roots? Could this revelation shake the monarchy so deeply that it risks losing the public's trust forever? Harry's ultimatum. The walls of the palace seemed colder than ever as Harry walked through the long corridors, his steps firm, his heart heavy. Every portrait of ancestors on the wall seemed to watch him, as though silently judging the path he was about to take. But he had made up his mind. There could be no turning back. When he finally stood before his father, the air was thick with silence. Charles sat by the window, his posture tense, his face unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The fragile bond between father and son was pulled to the edge of breaking. Harry spoke quietly but firmly, demanding the full truth. No half-answers, no whispers. His words carried both grief and determination, shaped by years of unspoken pain. Charles lowered his gaze, avoiding his son's eyes. His silence spoke more than any explanation. Harry hesitated, opening his mouth and then falling silent, as if the burden of his thoughts was too heavy to release. When he finally spoke, his words carried strain. He questioned the toll events were taking on himself, on Meghan, and on Archie, expressing frustration at what he saw as his father's silence. His voice broke, drawing a stark contrast between the man speaking and the boy who had once walked beside his father at his mother's funeral. Charles looked up, his expression marked by conflict. He spoke cautiously, suggesting that there were matters Harry could not yet understand, matters that once revealed could not be taken back. His tone carried a warning rather than reassurance. Harry's response was resolute. He shook his head and declared that without honesty, he would walk away permanently. The silence that followed was heavy, signaling a family strained to its breaking point. Charles's hesitation provided Harry with an unspoken answer. Affection was present but overshadowed by restraint, tradition, and guarded secrecy. Later that night, in the quiet of their home, Meghan stood beside Harry. Her presence was steady, her support conveyed through silence, through a reassuring hand on his shoulder, and in a few softly spoken words. They would face whatever came, together. Harry nodded, his heart torn but resolute. He knew the path before him was painful, but he also knew that silence was a wound that would never heal. With Meghan at his side, he began to accept the truth. His independence might come at the cost of family ties. The standoff between father and son had left scars that would not fade easily. The boy who once sought his father's approval was now a man ready to step away if truth was denied him. And as the night drew on, the question lingered in the air like an unspoken vow. Will Harry finally walk away from the royal family for good, or will blood ties hold him back? The aftermath. The storm that had shaken the palace finally began to settle, but only on the surface. Days passed, and the royal family returned to their public roles, smiling before cameras, waving to crowds, and acting as though nothing had happened. Yet behind closed doors, the wounds were still fresh, and the silence between father and son spoke louder than any speech. Harry and Meghan made a quiet decision to retreat into their private life once again. The grand halls of the palace no longer felt like home to them. Instead, they found comfort in the simple moments with Archie. His laughter in the garden, his little hands reaching out to them, his innocence untouched by the storm that had surrounded his name. Harry often cradled his son. Speaking in whispers meant only for a child to hear. One evening, as Archie slept in his arms, Harry vowed protection against all that was said beyond their walls. From the doorway, Meghan looked on quietly, recognizing the depth of his promise. For Meghan, the quiet life was both a shield and a burden. Away from the endless chatter of newspapers and talk shows, she found peace. Yet she also knew that silence did not erase suspicion. The world had seen too much, heard too much, and whispered too much. Still, she stood firmly by Harry's side, her calm strength guiding him through the weight of doubt. Meanwhile, King Charles faced a different battle. Though he smiled in public and delivered carefully written speeches about unity, his crown felt heavier than ever. Advisors urged him to move forward, to focus on duty, and to keep the monarchy steady. Yet he could not escape the whispers. Everywhere he turned, there were questions about why he had spoken when he did, and what more he might still be hiding. Charles worked tirelessly to hold the monarchy together, but the crack in the foundation was visible to anyone who dared to look closely. The public, too, was left unsettled. Some felt sympathy for Harry, praising him as a father fighting to protect his child. Others wondered whether Meghan's silence carried hidden truths. Crowds outside palaces and cathedrals spoke in hushed tones, and even in living rooms across Britain, families debated what had really happened. Time moved forward, but answers did not. The scars within the family remained, hidden beneath polite smiles and public duties. And though the palace pressed on with its routines, there was an unspoken sense that something had changed forever. Harry and Meghan found their solace in Archie, building a world of their own, away from the noise. Charles turned back to his responsibilities, wearing the crown with resolve, but carrying the weight of secrets that only he knew. The story of Archie's parentage had shaken the monarchy to its core, yet the final truth still lingered in the air, heavy and unanswered. Did King Charles reveal the whole truth about Archie? Or is there still a secret lurking in the shadows, waiting to shatter the monarchy once again?